Hey, ladies, we are so excited to welcome you to another episode of a Superwoman Handbook. We've been really diving into our intuition, trusting our gut and ourselves to know which way we need to go. And I know sometimes that can feel really overwhelming and intimidating. So we have our friend Mindy with us today, and she's going to kind of walk us through how do you discover your intuition? How do you learn to trust it? And how, most importantly, how can you help us to do that?
Well, let me say thank you for having me. I enjoy doing this. I really have recently started speaking publicly and sharing my knowledge and wisdom. So I appreciate the opportunity to share this. And I definitely feel guided to be in every position that I end up getting to speak about these kind of things. And so what I will say is to start, right? To start. So let me preface that with recognizing that intuition is something that has been downplayed, right? Historically, that women's intuition outside of the mother's intuition, which is what most of our modern society will accept. Intuition is something that does not need to be the only thing you follow, nor your logic and reason. So, being able to recognize that we live in a society today that is primarily based on logic and reasoning, and the intuition being more the feminine, right? So, this patriarchal system that most of our world has been under, and historically there's evidence to show that purposefully the powers that were had downplayed and turned intuition into something that was taboo or evil or not important, not valued, right? And so as knowledge has increased in the availability to access knowledge has increased, people have started to say, "Oh, well, that thought I had about this and then it happened, I can't just dismiss it anymore." And so I think the more awake and more aware and more knowledgeable people are, and the more accepted, I mean, even as a psychotherapist, I've seen studies where they've done subjective studies about intuition, and in the professional realms, people are acknowledging its importance and that it is very real. So I think as people start to notice that they have these experiences, whether it's a dream that comes true, what's called a precognitive moment, where you have like a flash or a thought about something that hasn't happened yet, and then it happens, and you're like, "Oh," or you have something that is, I would say, symbolically, it's similar enough for you to go, "That's why that makes sense," right? So a lot of times, even with my clients, when they start healing from their traumas, they recognize that instead of just their intuition constantly scanning the environment for some threat, they start noticing that they're having other experiences, such as earworms, a song lyric that loops in their head over and over again. And then they find that there's meaningfulness. There's something important about that particular lyric to them. So I think, I think a lot of, especially women who are in touch with their intuition, or they're exploring it, they're awakening to it. And even some of us who are seasoned can say that learning to trust your intuition starts with releasing all of these restricting negative core beliefs that are conditioned through our systems of control. And I won't get on my soapbox about why, but I will say, what I will say is that as people embrace that, it's not like some hard work that you have to do. It's actually so simple and so easy. And we tend to overcomplicate it because that's the way we've been taught to think. So when you have this thought about something that seems random, sometimes I call those feather thoughts, as if it just kind of swoops in. It doesn't necessarily go with the context of something you were already thinking about. It seems different. Like I'm getting ready to throw a pool party baby shower for my son and my daughter-in-law. And so if I'm thinking about the things that we need to do and I'm in that more masculine brain that let me do my to-do list and make sure things are organized and all of that, and all of a sudden I have this dice in my head. I see dice and I'm like, what the heck is what where did that come from? Right? So I'm like, at first I may dismiss that for a moment and say, okay, that was a weird thing to pop into my head. And then a few minutes later, I'm trying to make a decision about something, right? Which is a very more masculine oriented thing too, decision making. And I go back to the dice and I'm like, oh, well, let me take a chance on what feels right rather than what
Mhm.
is logical. And usually when I do that, I'm right. It's not steered me wrong.
Mhm.
I hope that answers the question.
It does. So, kind of bring us back to when did you become open and available to really dig into this intuition beyond just an average person and to actually become, a subject matter expert?
Well, I will say that started very early in life. And, looking back on things with what I know now, it actually started with a trauma at age 3 that was me hiding in a closet from a monster and that kind of thing. And I flew out of my body and socked the monster in the nose and was in the closet frozen and stiff at the same time. Right. But when I go back and I really look at what I know, not just metaphysically and psychologically, scientifically, all if when I put all of the pieces together, where things shifted really for me, it was more like, we're born as children, we're small children, we're still wide open. We don't have all the conditioning of the world just yet. We can remember past life things, we engage with the fairies and all of those things until the adults around us tell us that's not real and we start to shut it down. But in my case, at 5 years old, I had a near death experience where I drowned in a lake. And I was at that age where would hold my nose and go underwater and say, "Hey, mom, look, I can swim underwater." Right. And in
Still
this
do that?
experience, and remember thinking to myself, wow, I'm swimming underwater and I'm not holding my nose. So that's a key memory that tells me what my experience actually was. And it wasn't some imagined experience. Right. So I remember seeing light coming from the bottom of the lake, and it was a little bit confusing when I thought on it later, but in the moment I was like, "Oh wow, I got to go see what this is." So I was drawn to it and I kept swimming underwater and I got almost there and I could see through this light, this watery looking light, I could see these gigantic bright colored flowers and I could see these people, but it was more like they were silhouettes of light and they were just moving around. And I had a sense that I knew who they were, but I didn't know because I couldn't make out details because they looked like silhouettes of light at first. And so I think I didn't get quite close enough to tell who they were exactly, but I had a sense of who they were. And the next thing I know is I'm going backwards through this darkness. And the next thing I know is I'm coughing and I'm choking and I'm crying and I'm pissed off because I was almost there. And I'm like, why? Why did you pull me back? I was about there. And in my mind, I guess I had seen or heard about Atlantis. In my mind, I think maybe I had seen a cartoon or a story, something. There was something in my mind that registered that I was looking at Atlantis. What I know now is what I was looking at was two. One was Atlantis and one was Lemuria because I've had past experiences in both. So it was as if my past and future kind of collided in a way. Now, when you have a near death experience, and I don't know very many people or have heard of very many experiences that were scary or negative, but I didn't know that that was a near death experience until I was in college and I was studying these things and was like, oh, wow, that was not a dream. That was not because I do remember details. And I remember I was brought up in the Southern Baptist Church in the Christian tradition, and sometimes the things they said in church, I was like, yeah, that's what yeah, yeah. Like it would make sense. It was just it was very easy. And then some things I would be like, that's not what Shua told me. They're not going to believe me. I would have these debates in my head. So, a few months after this near death experience, I came down with encephalitis from chickenpox that didn't break out. And I had a sustained fever of 105 for 4 days. And I would swim down the hallways and go see different places, and then I would swim back, and I could see myself laying in the bed, and I did this little dive. So the water reference was so right there because it was so fresh, right? So I did this little dive, and I would go in my body, and I thought I was just waking up from a dream or something, and I would tell my mom about it, and apparently there was enough consistency in the things that I was saying that she started to go and validate, and she would come back and ask me questions. So I was having out of body experiences, astral travel, going into different dimensions, and still able to recognize that they were somehow overlapped in this dimension that we see and experience while we're physically awake. Right? So I had some understanding that there was more than just this third dimensional reality, and that made me wide open. And empathically, I didn't have boundaries because of it. So as a kid, I was the very sensitive, emotional one at school, and was the kid who by lunchtime I was ready to go home with a headache and a stomach ache because I was overwhelmed sensory wise and emotionally, energetically. Like I just would hit that overwhelm and thought it was just me the whole time. So I grew up thinking I was just the weird kid, and I technically kind of was, and I'm glad that I didn't fit in. I never fit in, and now I see why, and I'm glad. Very grateful for the experiences I've had that have made me who I am, and taught me how to manage and hone those skills and develop more.
So it sounds like you had a mother, a family that was very open
I
to
did.
helping you explore and understand
Yes.
these feelings. Kinda tell us about that just in case someone's listening and their child might be doing similar things
Sure.
to you. How can we be supportive of that?
So I'll say that, yes, while I was brought up in this Southern Baptist Christian home and community, our family was primarily, we were more the quiet liberals, the non-racist people in the area that had a history of being part of the Underground Railroad. We were the ones we had midwives and herbalists and such. We had all of that in my maternal history. And my great grandfather's mother was Creek Indian. And so my grandmother, who lived with us growing up, it was younger sister, my mother, and my grandmother in our home growing up, and our great grandparents and a great aunt next door. So I had this multi-generational family where I was fed a lot of both religion and spirituality, because even though we were quiet outside of the home about our intuitive experiences and such, inside the home, we talked about our dreams. We shared what we dreamed the night before. My grandmother would call our intuitive experiences the seeing eye, because that was kind of what was acceptable in a way. And of course, now we know there's multiple ways of experiencing intuition, right? So, yeah, I grew up with a strong line of women who didn't completely shut all of that down, but these strong women who didn't publicly use their voice either. And I feel honored to be the one that fell to, that I can speak for the ancestors who couldn't speak for themselves. So yeah, I grew up with it being accepted, but kept quiet to a degree.
How is it that now in this day and age, how do you use your voice? How do you work with clients? How do you make this not an imaginary thing, but you bring it into real life?
Right. Right, right. Well, a lot of different ways. Practically speaking, I have just in the last month or so actually started speaking on podcasts, and I started writing a book recently. And with my clients, I've noticed that even like throughout my career, of course, early in my career as a therapist, I was under supervision of other people, and I had to follow, there's still ethics and guidelines that we have to follow regardless. but I felt like I had to do it just according to what they were telling me. And now I realize I bring me to therapy instead. And there are times with my clients that something just comes through, and I don't always know what that's going to be, but it's just that right thing that needs to be said in the moment. And I've learned to just trust that and allow it to flow. So with my clients, I not only see psychotherapy clients, I also see energy healing clients, spiritual coaching. So I call them all clients, but the psychotherapy ones have more like, ethics and standards and restrictions and such, but I still do that. So when I have clients come to me with they feel stuck in life or they have trauma that they know they have and they know it's holding them back and so I spend a lot of time building that relationship with my clients and letting them know that hey, weird is okay in here. So if people start, because we've heard woo woo and weird and all of this, and primarily my clients are females, when people realize that there's nothing they can say to me in my office that I am going to see as really weird. There's nothing they're going to say to me that I'm going to judge. So even if I have a client tell me, which I don't work necessarily with psychosis, but even if I have a client tell me I have aliens growing between my teeth, I'm going to say, okay, let's tap in and see what kind of bacteria that is. Right.
Uh-huh.
So
Yep.
one of the things that happens when we experience trauma is whatever intuitive abilities are at the forefront, because we all have all of them. We all have the capacity to develop whichever ones we choose, really. But some tend to be a little bit stronger than others. So when a trauma happens, especially in childhood, whatever intuitive abilities are at the forefront get magnified. So that person tends to walk around in fear, but with their intuition, their awareness. And to me, intuition is just awareness. And that's a whole different conversation. But with their awareness expanded, they're in a fear based state. And a fear based state, the energy of fear is very dense, heavy, and constricting. And so they're constantly feeling like, when's the other shoe going to drop? When's the next bad thing going to happen? And so in their healing process, they learn how to find meaning in their experience. They learn that intuition that they're using to potentially protect themselves from some perceived threat can be used for guidance, can be used for developing other intuitive capabilities. And so part of the healing process, primarily with my psychotherapy clients and my coaching clients, is shifting from that fear based intuitive awareness to love based, to purpose. And when you do that, the energy of love is expansive instead of constricting. It's high frequency energy. And I would say because of cultural influences and personal experiences, people sometimes have difficulty with the love piece. So I start them at gratitude instead. Gratitude and joy. And joy means being present with what you're doing and having fun. So being in that childlike state where you just go with the flow, right? And you are present to what you're doing, you're playing. When children are playing, they're usually laughing. I mean, occasionally conflict happens, but and the reason they're having fun is because they're very present to what they're doing. And so getting that joy back, that childlike wonder and awe, and going with the flow helps my clients recognize that, hey, I didn't go through what I went through for no reason. And maybe, just maybe, it has to do with the reason I chose to come here to begin with.
So while we're kind of talking about words, joy, gratitude, I want to ask your opinion on some kind of polar words that we've been playing with on the podcast the last few weeks and just get your thoughts. And specifically, how would you define the difference between religion and spirituality, being a spiritual person or being a religious person? How are those different?
Right. Well, religion is based on structure. It's based on someone external to you telling you what things are. telling you what this means, telling you, what's good and what's bad. You know, it's very much like going to school and they're teaching you math in a way. They're saying this plus this equals this. And so in religion, what I've seen in the various religions, not as much with some of the Eastern religions, but more of the Western, you see this idea that's imposed that some kind of God or deity is outside of you, that it's above you, that it's somewhere out there and you have to search and find. And that is not necessarily the truth. You know, spirituality, when I speak about spirituality, I'm thinking one connection. The number one thing is, do you or what makes you feel connected to yourself, to nature, to others, to something bigger than you that you believe is loving, right? Something bigger than you that's within you, not outside of you, that you can access, that gives you a sense of truth and guidance, and where you can access your resilience and where you can access joy, where you can cope with things that are more difficult and find wisdom in them rather than hold on to them and make yourself sick, hoping that some external deity is going to like just come and remove it for you. Right. So, yeah, religion is like a traditional set of dogma structure with rules, and oftentimes is very fear based and directionally external, whereas spirituality is very subjective and personal and based on connection and higher frequency, like love and joy and gratitude and mercy and forgiveness. And when we experience hard things in life, that learning that ability, and I wish we had really grown up in a world that taught us alchemy. I really wish I hadn't. Now, I had some of that. That's through my guidance as a child, but learning how to transmute, okay, I feel sad or I'm hurt or I'm angry about something. I'm going to sit with it, acknowledge it, and say, what are you showing me? What are you teaching me? And once I get that, then I release. I alchemize the energy of that so that I don't hold on to it. So spirituality is very personal, but it's also there's a lot of common threads with the human being in general in our natural way of living in spirit, that we have what's called shared experiences, and that gives us a greater sense of deep connection with others and not feeling so alone. And sometimes in religious settings, people can feel very alone because they're looking for something outside of themselves.
I love that you kind of articulated that. And then the last word, and then I promise I'll let you go, that I wanted you to kind of unpack for us. When we were
Let me
doing our
go.
pre
Don't let me go.
when we were doing our pre-call, you mentioned the word sovereign many times. I wrote it down and I circled it.
Yes.
What does sovereign mean?
Sovereign means I have learned to go into my inner knowing and trust it, regardless if it aligns with some external set of rules, whether it aligns with some structure, whether it aligns with some perceived authority, because we've been conditioned to think in hierarchical terms, and that some people have more power or have authority over us. If you don't live in spirit, that's true. But if you live sovereignly, if you live from your inner knowing, you live in connection with your higher self, with others, with nature, something bigger than you, right? Something that gives you guidance, gives you peace, brings you that joy, right? Then learning discernment or developing discernment helps you recognize that, hey, sometimes what I'm experiencing or what feels right to me, it might sort of align and I can kind of go along with something, and that's wisdom. And then sometimes it's sort of like neutral. Okay, yeah, I couldn't, and I'll just choose, but I choose based on my inner knowing and trusting my intuition rather than what someone else necessarily wants me to do. And that can get, fun depending on who that is. But and then there are times when my inner knowing completely is on the other end of the spectrum than what I'm being presented with, and I've had to truly learn how to say no and set boundaries.
I love that, and I love that you had just the bravery and the vulnerability to come into this in your own life and to share it with us because always know that we're not alone, we're not unique. There is someone who's listening to this who is really aligning with what you're saying and feels really seen and understood. By kind of the journey that you talked through. Now, if someone wanted to find you online, where would they look? How do you work with your clients? Kind of where are you available for folks to access?
Well, for any of the services that I provide, Psychology Today, my Psychology Today profile is primarily for the psychotherapy, but that's how people access me for energy healings and spiritual coaching as well. I don't necessarily put all of that in there because it is based on, some parameters, but if you read my Psychology Today profile, you'll see. If you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you'll get it. I am on Facebook and Instagram. I think my links will be in the bio and such. I do not have a website right now for the thing that's coming about now. That's still sort of under construction. So I was guided to create an online spiritual community where there will be some really cool educational portals. And in some of those portals, I offer some courses, some certifications actually for such things as Reiki and quantum energy healing and DNA encoding and such. So some pretty interesting if that appeals to people, right? So that's called the Sanctuary of Crystal Sophia, and hopefully that'll launch this fall.
I love that, and we will. We'll drop all that in the show notes for everyone so they can find you online, they can follow up if they feel like they need to kinda develop this more or they just feel called to develop this more.
Yes.
It's always good to kinda have a partner and someone who has walked that path before.
Speaking of intuition, if something resonates with you, you know it because you're drawn to it, you're curious about it. So if these things resonate with you, great, great. If they don't, it doesn't mean that it's bad or that you're bad or anything like that. It just means maybe you're meant to go in a little bit of a different direction, and that's okay.
That giving ourselves permission. You're meant to go in a
Yes,
different direction, that's okay. I think so
yes,
often in all the categories of life, we as women, we struggle to give ourselves permission.
yes.
So I love that you chose that exact word architecture to kind of put on that. And kind of with that, what do you want to leave our listeners with today?
Well, what I will say is when I look at the microcosm and the macrocosm, one of the things that I perceive and that I have a role in is there's dormant DNA for the divine feminine encoded in all of us, not just women, in men too, but it starts with us. So the reactivation of the divine feminine is happening. Just take a look around, you'll see. I think people are starting to really notice that. So that is a very empowering, thing to embrace, and when you embrace that, you can't help but to embrace your sovereignty, and you're gonna have sacred fury because all of the lies and the systems of control are gonna piss you off. I mean, a lot of people are pissed off, right? But don't allow the anger to put you back in a dormant state. Allow it to be sacred fury because power is masculine, power over. Empowerment is feminine. Now, we're not meant to be just feminine. Truly, what I see happening is as we re embrace the divine feminine and balance it with our masculine, because we've been so masculinized in our modern world, we don't even realize it. As we heal our feminine and in the divine feminine again, the masculine we carry will naturally heal because it follows. It is the protector and the provider of the feminine. And as we who walk in the feminine primarily do that, we become a new being. We become something more transcendent. We're no longer in duality anymore. So the masculine in the world around us, so to speak, will follow suit. they don't really have to put a whole lot of effort into it. It just will kind of start naturally happening, honestly. So, what I see is as we wake up to this, as we reactivate this, we balance this out, bring into union, and start to live more sovereignly as a divine, celestial human being, the toxic patriarchal systems will no longer matter. They will no longer exist. They will no longer have control. And this is where humanity has the opportunity to heal. That is my perspective on it. This is how we build Nova Gaia, how we build the new earth, how we build new earth consciousness, the new Eden, however you want to frame that, right? So I have my very first granddaughter on the way. And I want to make sure I have done everything in my power at this point to make sure so that to ensure that when she steps into her awareness of who she is, right? In fact, I have a feeling she's going to be born already knowing that. But I want her to step into Nova Gaia, not this that we've all had to deal with for most of our lives.
Yes. Well, I love how you put that, and that's such a perfect bow to put on this. So we'll drop everything in the show notes so y'all can find Mindy online if you want to learn more about what she does or how she may help you. But I just want to thank you for coming on today and sharing your wisdom because when we know better, we do better. And collectively, we can't know it
Right.
all. So, I mean, individually, but collectively, we can. So I love that you
I'd
came on
like
and
to
you
think.
shared this.
Yes, and
Well,
thank you so
awesome. Well,
much for having me,
you're welcome.
and bless you all.